Throughout history, methods of execution have reflected the values, fears, and evolving sense of justice in society. Some are widely known for their horror, burning at the stake for example, or hanging, drawing and quartering, but one lesser known method may rival them in cruelty, the garrote. Used in Spain and its former colonies for centuries, the garrote was a simple looking but gruesome machine designed to slowly strangle a person to death. Though often presented as a more humane alternative to other punishments, the reality was far more horrific. In truth, the garrote was a method of slow, agonising, and often botched execution, far worse than you'd think. To support our channel, please click subscribe. The garrote, or garrote vil, traces its origins back to the Middle Ages, and possibly even earlier. The word itself comes from the Spanish word garro, meaning iron collar or strangling instrument. Early forms of the garrote may have been simply a rope or wire used to strangle criminals or enemies, but over time it evolved into a more formalised and institutional tool of death. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Spanish garrote had become mechanised. It was officially adopted as the standard method of capital punishment in Spain in 1820, replacing public hangings. Its use spread to Spain's colonies, including the Philippines, and also parts of Latin America. At first glance, the garrote might not appear particularly menacing. It consisted of a wooden or metal chair, to which a condemned person would be strapped. Behind the chair, affixed to the upright support, was a metal collar connected to a screw mechanism. The collar would be placed around the victim's neck, and then a screw, sometimes tipped with a metal spike, would be turned slowly into the back of the neck or even the spine. The goal was to crush the trachea or sever the spinal cord. However, there was no guarantee of a swift death. If the executioner turned the screw improperly or too slowly, the victim could be left choking and convulsing for minutes before dying. The lack of precision and the sheer physicality of the method meant that botched executions were certainly not uncommon. By the standards of the 19th century, the garrote was often described as a modern and more civilised alternative to older punishments like hanging or beheading. It was seen by some as more private, more controlled and less gory. But these justifications masked the sheer brutality of what it actually entailed. The process involved immobilising a conscious human being, binding them to a chair and slowly crushing their neck with a screw, while fully aware of their impending suffocation or spinal trauma. In some designs, the screw would take multiple turns to fully penetrate the vertebrae, meaning death did not come instantly. Pain, terror and panic were all very much part of the experience. Accounts from the 19th and early 20th centuries paint a different picture than the supposed civility of the garrote. Witnesses often described the gasping, gurgling and spasms as the condemned struggled. Some executions were quick, but many were not. One particularly infamous garroting occurred in 1906 in Barcelona, when anarchist Salvador Puig Antich was executed. The execution took place after the abolition of the death penalty had been debated across Europe, and the event was viewed by many as barbaric and outdated. In Puig Antich's case, the garrote was reportedly poorly maintained, and the process failed to break his neck cleanly. Witnesses said he died slowly over several agonising minutes, drawing international condemnation. A British observer in the 19th century present for a garroting in the city of Madrid wrote, "There was no sound but the turning of the screw, and then a sudden gasp, and the twitching of limbs. It was hideous in its silence, far worse than hanging." Now, the garrote wasn't just a tool of execution, it was a symbol of state power and repression. Spain under the fascist regime of Francisco Franco, from 1939 to 1975, used the garrote as a weapon against dissenters and enemies of the regime. It was a tool of terror, used not only to execute criminals, but to make examples of political opponents. Two of the last garrotings in Spain were particularly notorious. Salvador Puig Antisch, as mentioned, and Heinz Scherz, a German-born anarchist. These executions shocked much of Europe and were widely covered in the media. In both cases, the executions were seen as politically motivated. Franco's regime was on the verge of collapse, and these executions symbolised its desperation, but also its brutality. Spain was the last European country to use the garrote. After Franco's death in 1975 and the transition to democracy, the death penalty was officially abolished in 1978. The garrote was finally retired, and its last surviving examples were sent to museums, grim relics of a dark chapter in Spanish legal history. Today, garrotes or garroting machines can be seen in museums across Spain, including the Museo del Romanticismo in Madrid and the Museo del Ejército in Toledo. Often accompanied by stark wooden chairs and rusted screw mechanisms, these artefacts remain haunting reminders of a machine that presented itself as orderly and modern, but was in reality a slow, torturous death device. What makes a garrote worse than you'd think is the misleading perception of dignity and also cleanliness it once carried. There was no blood, no rope burns, no decapitation, but this superficial neatness masked a much deeper horror. Victims died fully aware, often unable to scream, their windpipes collapsing under intense pressure, the screw then pushing through muscle and bone. Death could be fast, but when it wasn't, it was a slow-motion strangulation, mechanical and intimate. Unlike firing squads or even hangings, which might allow for a relatively quick or impersonal death, the garrote forced the condemned to face their killer just inches away. The executioner, often called the verdugo, had to turn the screw manually, applying just the right pressure to break the neck or crush the windpipe. Some had to turn it back and start again if they missed the right spot. There was no elegance to this, just brutality masquerading as efficiency. The garrote was one of history's most deceptive methods of execution. Presented as humane, yet rooted in agony, it combined the cold logic of machinery with the raw suffering of a slow death. Though now relegated to history books and museum displays, its legacy serves as a grim reminder that what is labelled modern or civilised can be deeply cruel. When people imagine capital punishment in Spain, they rarely picture this device, but they should. The garrote wasn't just a footnote, it was the dominant method of execution there for over a century. And behind every chair, every screw, and every execution was a moment of unimaginable terror. Was the garrote worse than you'd think? Absolutely. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.